this is my meet report from modules 1 through 6. The first module. First film we watched in the first module was Misrepresentation. The quote by Jonathan Griffith: when such oversimplified and overgeneralized assumptions become standardized in speech, in movies, on TV, then become stereotypes. In this we learn in such examples where they say all black people are good dancers. You could say all Asians are just overly smart. People can say Latinos and Mexicans are generally depicted as greasers or violent criminals. People think that we can be over scrutinizing these representations, but the truth of the matter of fact is that Hollywood is not random, and I think it's okay to over scrutinize things, just like Smith says. In this movie, the theme was the representation of women in America. We learned a lot of things in this film. For one thing, for example, is that just how women were always wanted to be looked at as models and overly beautiful people, and this really can be a problem because a lot of young people, young girls in our society are overly influenced by this, and this can cause people to have a lot of very harmful diets, and just really affects their day-to-day life because they think this is how they are supposed to present themselves because of this. The average person in America watches a lot of TV a day, and it's not just TV too, and it's the radio, it's online, it's social platforms, everything. So if you're having all these depictions of women saying that you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to be overly skinny, it can really be a big problem, especially someone that's very young and just getting into these things if they don't have the conversation first. And I think it's very important to have conversations with your children, and let them know, and you always got to let them know they're to be proud of who they are and that they're beautiful for just like I said, who they are. The module 2 was this film was not yet rated. The quote by Jonathan Griffith again: Hollywood film has always privileged men in male roles over women and female roles. I talk about this quote because one of the things that I thought was pretty crazy to me in this documentary was that the people of the MPAA, they seem to give the NC-17 ratings for not just sexually exploitive narratives, but it seems when there was anything to deal with homosexuality or with women getting pleasure, things that just made them feel uncomfortable, they tended to give an NC-17 rating more often than not. And it's crazy when they can have just a male dominant person even showing a very horrific rape scene, they can still just give an R rating. But when it's just two gay men or two lesbians having a sex scene, and it's not even comparable to some of the horrific or violent scenes where they give a rated R rating, they just, like I said, tend to go to a NC-17 rating. Another thing to quote: women must contend with Hollywood conventions that women on screen must be likable or cleave to Madonna or catfight stereotypes. That just goes on to say too that the rating system, if they see something that makes them feel uncomfortable and the women aren't depicted where the stereotypical American viewer doesn't like them right away, it makes them feel uncomfortable. Themes from this movie, I would say, um, the director really felt strongly that the MPAA shouldn't be anonymous. They definitely are, like I said, sexist in my earlier comments about it. And another thing was they're not favoring to independent cinema. So obviously, with there were a few, mainly just a few big companies that control Hollywood. Disney be one of them, um, and those companies, they can almost control the MPAA, and they can get away with doing certain things, and they can have an influence over them. But independent cinemas where they don't have that political or um, financial influence over them, they really can't do much. And giving them an NC-17 rating for these independent movies, it really hurts them at the box office. Whereas a big studio, if they were to get it, they can maybe afford to go with that rating, or they can influence the MPAA to just give them an R rating. But like I said, if it's just give them an NC-17 rating for an independent cinema, it'll really kill a movie. Module 3, one of the movies we watched in this was Forbidden, directed by Frank Capra. I actually enjoyed this movie a lot. I'm actually a big Capra fan, but I never seen it, so I'm glad that we were forced to watch this movie. So, to quote Benchoff and Griffin, because of their popularity with the public, some of these stars were able to maintain a degree of control over their own projects. So this was something interesting that I learned too, like stars like Barbara Stanwyck that started in Forbidden here. They did have some control, but in order to have that control, they had to be seen as these beautiful figures, like not just on screen, but in their day-to-day lives too. They had to be seen to go into fancy dinners, have huge houses, and that's how they were one of the only ways that they were able to have power in Hollywood at this time. Simply by just being beautiful in their movies, and like I said, in their day-to-day lives as well. Something really interesting too that I learned in this module was in 1927 to 1934 is the pre-code Hollywood era. So I think movies like this, Forbidden, which is 1932, I think it was progressive for its time. The lead role in this film, she obviously was attracted to the district attorney. Then she found out he was married, and she stayed with him anyway. And she gave up everything just to be with him. She gave up her child. She gave up any career, and she just stayed with him forever. Even in his death, and the very end, she had the chance to let everyone know that his child was actually hers, but she just gave up everything to be with him, and she really wasn't looked to be like a bad character, like someone that was having an affair with a married man. If anything, in this movie, she was looked at to be a victim, in my opinion. In my opinion, too, the real perpetrator was the man, because he pretty much took whatever he wanted. He gave her the option of bringing things to light with, he should have been the one that just come to light, but he never had the power to do that. So themes of this movie, I would say, is the forbidden love, the men's power over women, and the promiscuity, which for its time I think was it was very liberal for its time, and yeah, I think after the pre-code era, this movie probably wouldn't have been made. I think it probably would have been a lot more censored. So I definitely think was ahead of its time. Module 4, in this module we watched I, Tonya, which I very much enjoyed. I know a lot of people they felt uncomfortable about it. Uncomfortable about it. They thought the domestic abuse they almost were like making it to be comical, but in my opinion, it really wasn't comical. I think the movie itself is a black comedy, but um I think really they don't depict domestic violence as they do in some other movies, but I still don't think they were trying to make light of it. If anything, they were trying to point out like one of the scenes where she said um, when the when Nancy Kerrigan is hit in the knee by the perpetrator, Tanya Harding says that she got hit one time, where Tanya Harding was hit all the time. It's pretty much just viewing the whole story from a different lens, in my opinion. Tanya Harding just he's went through so much. And it's not to say that Nancy Kerrigan wasn't a victim herself, but in reality, there's just so much more to this story than like we ever were to realize. Like the documentaries, like the trailer that we were asked to watch, pretty much showed where Tanya Harding was the main perpetrator here. Where really, in this story anyway, that she didn't even know that that was going to happen, and there's just so much of the backstory that America just didn't know about. So anyway, to quote Metcalfe Griffin again, the usual Hollywood film had been and still is known for its sumptuous and glossy production values, subtly yet insistently displaying the appeal of material wealth. So in this module, we looked at the social structures and class. And Tanya Harding she definitely came from a stereotypical people might say like white trash family. She was very poor. She had to make her own costumes, her own dresses for Dan for ice skating. She definitely did not have a lot of money, and when she was trying to excel in skating, you know, people didn't want her to succeed because she didn't have like that wealth or that beauty that they wanted the American woman to be perceived as. Um, so yeah, I think this movie was really important because before this movie, the sexual structures of it, they weren't evaluated in this way. So themes in this movie, I had mentioned before, is the domestic abuse, the class structure, and how America wants women to act. Module 5. In Module 5, we watched Dolores. To quote Metcalfe Griffin, as early as the 1910s, Mexico had complained to Hollywood about its ongoing practice of negatively stereotyping Mexican and Mexican American characters. So I think this is true. Sometimes America, when they just depict foreigners in general, but especially Mexicans, they try to like make them seem to be violent and criminals. And in one of the articles we read, it was just some outrageous percentage. We find out that they depicted Mexicans as criminals, and I feel like it's just not fair. To talk more about the documentary Dolores, it was one of the main things I was surprised at is that Dolores was portrayed as an assistant to Cesar Chavez, when really, after watching this documentary, in my opinion, it seemed like she was an assistant. She was more like a partner to him, and in reality, I would say even more so that she seemed to be the one in charge. But America unfortunately has a tendency to write out women from history, and I'm glad this documentary exists so people can realize it. I will say though, one thing that kind of disturbed me about this documentary was Dolores had many children, and all of her children were very proud of her. Sometimes she was away from her children a lot, but she still always loved her children. Um, so one of the main things about feminists is that they're pro-choice, and at one point in this documentary, Dolores was talking about how she was pro-life. Obviously she had many children. She felt very strongly about it, and it doesn't say this in the documentary, but I can almost read, between the lines here, and I definitely could be wrong, but it seemed as if, the feminist society almost forced her to vocalize that she was pro-choice because that is just the feminist way, and I thought that was just kind of sad. I'm not saying not, whether I'm pro-choice or pro-life, but I'm just saying she had her own, whether it be religious beliefs or just her own beliefs, but it felt like she was almost just bullied into thinking this one way just so she can be accepted into the feminist society. Where I think it's okay if she can still be a feminist and still be pro-life, and I think we need to respect that. And I don't think someone who claims himself to be a feminist needs to just think every single way. I think it's okay to be complex, and I think it's okay to have layers. Um, but one thing that I really respected about Dolores was that when she was asked, if she, wanted the recognition or things like that, like she never cared. She really never was bothered that Cesar Chavez had the main spotlight. She just wanted, like, her people to have, um, you know, their their rights and their freedom, and to have good working conditions. She never was about the recognition. Um, Other people may view it otherwise, where they say that she should have recognition, and I agree too. And it's not just so we can give her, or awards, or just have her name written in history so much, but just it's important to me because I don't think just women in general should be written out of history. Not so much, just Dolores, but I think it's important that she should get the recognition she deserves. The themes in this documentary are, activists, such as her and Chavez, which talk about women written out of history, and also the feminism. So last module 6, Wind River. Um, this was probably my favorite movie that we watched in all the modules. I've seen it before. It's probably my third time viewing it, but I definitely viewed it with a different light this time. Reading the assigned readings beforehand. It's definitely very personal to me too. Someone that works in law enforcement, just actually a lot that I didn't know before this module. For example, how the Native American women are targets of rape due to the legislative loophole. Yeah, I honestly I did not know that. It's really sad actually, and I think it's very true. A lot of people don't understand that if they make something legal, or if you are not allowed to prosecute something, I think people and criminals, they know this, and they 100% take advantage of it. And in this story, um, it's very evident. It's very sad that the Native American woman was definitely a target of rape, because essentially they thought they can get away with it. Obviously, they did not in this story, but just in real life America, it seems so that they 100% can. We see a lot of this going on today too. For example, in New York, where they're no longer prosecuting, interfering with an officer or fighting back with them, and hopefully that will change. But it's essentially just going to tell people that they can fight with police, and it's going to happen more often. I know that may sound petty compared to what this is, but my point is just that criminals know that if they can get away with something such as this, they're going to take advantage of the system. Um, So anyway, to quote Benjamin Griffin, the bloodthirsty savage view constructed Native Americans as violent, aggressive, and demonic, bent on destroying innocent white settlers, including women and children. Um, Something that I thought was very important about this movie was their depiction of Native Americans. They didn't stereotype them. They just had, um, they were depicted as, normal Americans, which we don't see a lot of that in Hollywood. A lot of times they are, um, like Mitchell and Griffin say here, like as savages, you know, murderers, and they're just like bent on just killing white people, and is just not the case. And I'm glad this movie just was one of the rare films that just depicted them as to be normal people. Themes of this movie are the representation of Native Americans, which I just talked about, the ignorance of law enforcement. The FBI agent in this movie too, she clearly when she got there, she didn't even understand the laws or just the way of how things were there. At the end of the movie, she's in tears because there's just so much she just didn't know. And then finally, the last theme was the legislative loophole. Like I said, I just think it's really important um, to get those kind of facts out because it's it's always like very disturbing to me when just law enforcement fails to help people, and the fact that this has been known for so long and people just don't do anything about it, and these Native American women just become targets of these predators. It's just so sad to me, and I think it's a very important topic. So that is the end of this, and here are my works cited. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.